thank you for everybody who's in attendance virtually here. So if you haven't got a chance to meet me or see the great things that we do as an organization, my name's Drew Smith. I've been with the organization 32 years. I'm recently overseeing the Santa Monica Mountains area, or the Malibus, if you will. Also West Hollywood, Marina Del Rey, and so that is what we call Division 7. So it's a lot of folks that we have under our supervision, or my supervision, with some people that are doing some great and fantastic things every day with the 911 calls and all the stuff that goes on with a very busy organization. So I broke this down into several areas. I want to give an overlook on the fire season. I wanted to talk to the Santa Monica Mountains specifically. I wanted to talk to evacuations, and I want to talk to technology. And last, we're going to talk about resources for community intelligence on notifications for the community to be involved. And I'll have your community service representative or liaison, which is Megan Currier, dive into that. So first, I'd like to talk about the seasonal outlook. I know that we have a lot of fires that have been happening up and down the state. We're hitting some historic acreage, if you will, throughout the state of California. And we have a major fire going on right now.
Chief Smith, I think we lost you.
Okay. How about now? It timed me out, apparently. You there?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
We lost historic fire acreage.
Okay, yeah, so we have some historic fire acreage that's going on within the state of California. And just talking about why that happens, well, in Northern California, most of the fire regime is Mother Nature caused. And when we get down to Southern California, most of our fires are human nature caused, whether it be mechanical failure, whether it be accidental, but it usually has human interaction of some sort. And so with that, the outlook for us, we do have significant vulnerabilities within California or in Southern California, or site specific for the Santa Monica Mountain Range every year. So I don't get too wound up in my other job, which I do for Los Angeles County, which is the Fire Behavior Analyst job. And I do that at the local level, the state level, and the national level. And there's about 50 of us practicing fire behavior analysts across the nation. And so we look at climatology, we look at fuel conditions, we look at how fire spreads across the landscape, and with a lot of different data, and then validating ground truthing on how that assessment looks throughout the season or every year. It's a never-ending job. So how does Los Angeles County Fire Department prepare, and how does this season stack up? Well, we had the second year of above average rainfall. Our average rainfall within the Santa Monica Mountains is somewhere near 15 inches. And most of our rainfall happens through the months of October through the first part of May, and then Mother Nature turns off the sprinkler system, and it depends on how much rain you get within that deliverable amount of time and how it affects your annual grasses to grow and how it affects the soil moistures for those lush green fuels that we love so much in the Santa Monica Mountains. So what do we do to prepare? Our organization actually samples all the vegetation within the Santa Monica Mountains in different geographic areas to look at the trends on how much moisture they're retaining within a certain species, so we can gauge how much moisture content is within a certain species within the Santa Monica Mountains. And we do that in actually all 5 of our forecast zones that we have broken up within Los Angeles County as a whole, so we can look at the climatology and vegetation differences within Los Angeles County, so we can look at our relative risk every day and with other factors that I'll talk about here shortly. So just going into how we work with our seasonal outlook, our partnerships is with the federal government, state government, and local government partners. Our National Weather Service out of Los Angeles is our governing predictive services fire weather forecasting office. So we are a significant contributor to what they do and as well what we do on looking at how the weather applies to the threat of fire across the landscape. So with a combination, looking at climatology, looking at those live fuel moistures, we have remote automated weather stations that are put up throughout Los Angeles County, specifically in the Santa Monica Mountains. So we can look at the climatology daily, look at how the vegetation is, and then it can tell us through an analysis every day we do this on what our relative risk is for large fire growth. So we use if anybody wanted to do a Google search, we use a thing called a burning index. And basically a burning index looks at vegetation, type, size, and class, which meaning how large is it, how old is it, how dry is it, or how wet is it every day. It looks at all the meteorological standpoint of what is going on through the weather throughout the course of a day and predicted, and it goes through what I like to call the Whopper computer and gives you a value. And with 100 years worth of fire history, and I guess you could say 50 years worth of climatology, we can look at a relative risk on how are we stacking up on an everyday with what our relative risk is for initial attack fire that will get large, or a day that we know that we're going to have the probability of large fire growth. So if you look at just within the last 3 years, we've had the Saddle Ridge fire, of course, we've had the Woolsey fire. So our relative risk that we looked at, we hit the point with knowing that we had large fire growth on looking at all those values, and then we go into how do we prepare for that. Well, with that daily risk analysis that we look at, the department responds by augmenting our helicopter workforce, our bulldozer workforce, our hand crew workforce, and also our engine company workforce by augmented staffing and putting resources in place to have a robust, enhanced initial attack response. And so with that, our target is to, if we have a fire start, to keep those fires at 10 acres or less with the most robust fire response anywhere in the nation with what we've, all the equipment and staffing we put for the initial attack component. So with knowing that how that interaction happens with the resources we have and the climatology that we have, we know that we live in a wind-driven fire regime. So the largest fires that we get in the Santa Monica Mountains are wind-driven by Santa Ana winds, which historically happen in the first part of October to around Thanksgiving. And then we know that we have had fire frequency within December, but if you think about fire across the landscape in the Santa Monica Mountains, the largest fires that we have are wind-driven in nature, and they're not Mother Nature started. They're happened from some human interaction. So within the Santa Monica Mountains, specifically within the amount of vegetation that's there has a high probability for large fire growth. Right now, if we looked at geographic areas, it would be the 101 freeway from Las Virgenes Road all the way to the Pacific Coast Highway, which transitions from Las Virgenes Road to Malibu Canyon, and then extending to the east along Mulholland through Calabasas to Old Topanga to Topanga Canyon Boulevard, across Topanga Canyon Boulevard to the south to Pacific Coast Highway. Hold on a second here. Are you still there?
Yep, we can still hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. And so then I'm just talking for LA County to Malibu, from Topanga Canyon to Pacific Coast Highway. That is a vegetation stand that hasn't had fire frequency since 93, 96, and even some places in Topanga in the state park that haven't seen fire frequency in 50 to 60, 75 years. If you extend the Santa Monica mountain range farther to the east with the Palisades all the way to the 405 freeway, there's a lot of areas that haven't had that fire frequency. So that is our biggest point of vulnerability for the potential for large fire growth, because of the density of the fuel bed that is there. If you look into the Woolsey fire, which is everything west of what I just described, it has had fire frequency since 2018. So could you have a significant fire? The answer is yes, with a significant rate of spread, but the fire is different across the landscape in fuels that are 25 years old compared to fuels that are 2 to 3 years old. The vegetation stands that are very young and lush do not emit the same energy release that comes out of the fuel bed. So the tactical opportunities and options we have are significantly different compared to if you focus just, if we talk about the Woolsey fire, that a lot of it hasn't seen fire frequency since the 78 Canaan fire or the 82 Dayton fire, or some of it going back to the Clampett and Wright fire of 56, it gives us different set of challenges when you have that amount of energy release that comes out of a fuel bed. With talking into tactics, you have to know that when we have these fires that start and we look at what I like to call our vulnerabilities, when you have any of those fuels, especially on the older fuel beds that emit an ember cast with the ripe and ready conditions to have it is very dry, relative humidities are in single digits, the average wind speeds are 20 miles an hour or greater, and sometimes range from 20 miles an hour to 70 miles an hour, depending on how far up you go in elevation. The residency time and the ember cast from those large fuels will transport new and start new fires 1 mile to 2 miles to 3 miles ahead of an advancing fire front. So that is the biggest challenge for combating these wildland fires. If we didn't have a spotting component, you would have a line of fire and the tactical opportunities are different. But when you have an ember cast that happens, that exponentially leapfrogs these fires across the landscape, and then once they take hold, they then launch new embers and into a receptive fuel bed, and that's how we get that exponential fire growth. From the 101 freeway to the Pacific Ocean, on average, fires travel across the landscape under a Santa Ana wind-driven day and reaches the coast at some point in time between 3.5 and 6 hours, depending on the continuous fuel bed, whether it is or not, and also the climatology. And our Santa Ana winds that we have, historically, as we get into our Santa Ana wind season now, they routinely come every 7 to 12 to 14 days that we're stacked up to have a Santa Ana wind event. And so when you have fire frequency that is caused by human interaction, it's hard to pinpoint when a fire will start, how fast it'll spread, because everything's based upon time. When I do fire behavior analyst work in Northern California, it's relatively easy because a lot of them are Mother Nature caused. So if we know what the fuel conditions are and you have a significant amount of lightning that comes through, you can look at the vulnerabilities of the fuel bed that it's in. You look at then how is that fire going to spread across the landscape with a Mother Nature caused event, and the timing is significantly different in categorizing the vulnerabilities for a Mother Nature caused event compared to a human nature type of event. So knowing that our fire regime, and we've done close to 800,000 acres in 100 years within the Santa Monica Mountains, we know the fire frequencies and how they're going to react across the landscape. So how do we transition into public safety? Well, first we bring in a robust response, and within the Santa Monica Mountains, we're very fortunate to have water supply capabilities, helispots. For one is the marvelous work that the 3rd District and the Los Angeles County Fire Department has done with 69 Bravo. And just to give you a little case in point, with a 5 to 7 acre fire we delivered 4 hours, 53,000 gallons with our Blackhawks to that fire. So combating the opportunity to combat these fires, to keep them small and combat them quickly. So with fires over the last, you there? You got me? Somebody say yes, please.
Yes, I got
Okay,
you.
thank you. All right, thank you. I went silent here. So I'm actually going to the Bobcat fire, but I pulled over here so we could do this. So I'm going into evacuations. So your fire department and your law partners are a significant component and the component to the evacuations. So for law and your sheriff's department or law, let's just say, is responsible for the evacuations. However, with the fire department, we give in a unified approach for law enforcement to go into evacuations. And those evacuations are done in 3 different ways. It's an evacuation order, an evacuation warning, or a shelter in place. And Megan or any of the other contributors on this can talk to how it's broadcasted. But what we do on evacuations, like I can give you a case in point for the Bobcat fire, for what's going on in the Antelope Valley and the Juniper Hills and all that along the Highway 138 corridor, is we look at the fire progression and we look at time. We unify with law, and then we put into motion what areas that we put into an evacuation order, whether they're in a warning, or we may have to know that there's certain people or areas that are in a shelter in place because time doesn't allow them to evacuate to get to a safe place. And that's a very coordinated approach to that, and it may seem chaotic to some, but at the incident command post, in our working relationship with the sheriffs, what we put in place is very coordinated, but it is very challenging based upon fire conditions. And if you've been tracking the Bobcat fire, our sheriffs, who are not trained like us in fire behavior, don't have the protective equipment, they don't have water, they have put themselves. I saw a lot of heroic work done by our law enforcement partners out here to meet the need for evacuations. The challenges throughout Los Angeles County, every community is unique because of the landscape, the communities, and the navigation of the road system and the warning system is different and unique throughout all of Los Angeles County. But I will let you know that your fire and law are working together continuously to make the evacuations as organized as we can. We have met for the Santa Monica Mountains specifically, we have met over 5 times and had 3 very robust drills and going through how evacuation should look, from how do we notify, how are we going to do our road closures, how are we going to give direction. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about folks maybe looking at wanting to have a resource of arrows and a flow chart of how evacuation should happen and which directions they should go. And that is a challenging thing to do because you may have a fire that starts that impacts the direction of travel that we need to do evacuation. So that is a very sensitive area on evacuations, on how those traffic patterns need to look for evacuations, because fire and where it's at, the timing and where it's going to go and what it's going to impact drastically changes how we're going to have a traffic pattern, if you will, to send people to get them to the safest location and resources available for them to be accommodated the best that we can. So that we know that is going to be very challenging for people, for getting an evacuation order to leave, and then for all the big county machine to get going to support folks at a facility that we've recognized. And those are a moving target as well, because we have to pick the best option for the incident that we have at hand. So we coordinate that. Just knowing that evacuation orders, warnings, and the shelter in place, what I have found through the years of doing this, not just in Los Angeles County, but across the country, that people don't really take the time to move when they're asked to, or if you want to say it, ordered to, that wait, and then when it gets unattainable, then they decide to leave, and it really puts people and our fire and law people in a position to have to get distracted from tasks to deal with something that could have been prevented if the public committed to the evacuation order. Because just because you don't see fire in your backyard on the hill behind you, it could be hours away, and we need that reflex time, if you will, to get people ahead of the fire's path and out into a safe place. So looking at the Woolsey fire, the evacuations, and they weren't at that time order, warning, or shelter in place. They had voluntary and mandatory, which it's basically the same thing, but now we're orders, warning, or shelter in place. Is that we, through the fire progression, when we rolled out the evacuations in general, 250,000 people evacuated, and I understand and know that we had 3 fatalities, which is tragic. Anytime we have a near miss or a fatality, it's tragic. But that has never been done in American fire history, with an advancing fire front with the timing to evacuate that many people. So if we look at it at a global perspective, I know there's a lot that we have done to improve, but one thing in emergency management, one thing in the fire service, one thing in law enforcement, it seems like you always get the test before you get the lesson. And so everything that we do based upon an event, we do nothing but look at what we could have done better. How can we enhance the good work that we're doing to make it better? So we keep the public safety component as paramount of what we want to do, so we can accommodate those that are evacuated. But we know that we're going to need the community support to be flexible until we can get everything geared up. Because besides the evacuations, remember, when we're running a large incident, your firefighters that are out there, they don't have the motels, they don't have food, they're living on MREs with no sleep. The biggest thing we have to worry about is getting fuel to them so they can fill the fire engines, and making sure that we have water availability for them to combat the fire and keeping them safe. So your firefighters are engaged in the element in this fire, if you will, war theater that is very, very demanding. So think about your firefighters and what they're going through on 3 days and 4 days, because we need to logistically support them as well. So this is a big, big machine that we're running to combat these fires. So I'll talk a little bit about technology. The technology now was compared to I'll talk to the incident command team stuff for 22 years now. The fire behavior analyst position that I have done for 20 years now. With the geospatial analytics that we have, to have resources available to look at fire spread, to have good predictive services for relative risk, to have mapping products done on an iPad, to having cameras that are all over the Santa Monica Mountains or across the state of California to having drone technology and aerial reconnaissance, it puts us in a good position to have intelligence on what the fire is going to do, and how we deal with it is dependent upon every fire is different. So we have a lot of technology, and that technology is also available to the public to track. But I'll tell you one thing on technology, and it'll go into community intelligence. Just be careful with that and making sure that it's at a reliable source. With anybody that goes in to get any intelligence on what a fire's doing. So look at the professionals on taking the actions that are necessary, but there is a lot that you can do. And in the Santa Monica Mountains or Malibu, you're way outside the Bobcat fire, but you can track it and watch it. It could be like watching 5 seasons of your favorite Netflix. You can watch this thing over the course of the 16 to 17 days that it's been burning now. So what I'll do is I'm going to pump the brakes right now. I'll let anyone jump on, or I'll hand it off to our Megan Courier, who is your link from the community to the fire department and to me. It's not because I don't want to talk to you, I do, but Megan has a position that she's a community service liaison or representative, you will. She is one that captures all the community or anything that needs to happen, so her and I can vet or then take appropriate action to meet the needs for the community and the interaction. So I'll kick it over to Megan right now.
Good evening, everyone. As Chief Smith said, I'm Megan Courier. I am the Community Services Liaison for Division 7. And I basically just wanted to discuss some good resources for information during an incident. I know that, as Chief Smith said, it's important to make sure that the information that you're getting is correct and directly from the source. So on the screen right now, this page that's up on the shared screen is the incident status page on the LA County Fire Department website. And right now it's discussing the Bobcat fire, but anytime there's an incident, there will be updates available on this page. And it will have all the latest information, so that's a good resource to have saved. And then the next website is a way to sign up for Alert LA. And this will ensure that you get all emergency alerts from the county. So if there is an evacuation order or anything like that, you'll get an alert directly from the county. Similar to that, the Malibu City public alerts. It's good to sign up for all of the alerts possible, so you don't miss anything. And Malibu does a great job of sending out alerts when something is affecting its residents. And then social media obviously is a big factor, a big way to get information. So this page is the Division 7 specific Facebook. There is a department-wide Facebook, but this page, we only share information that specifically affects Division 7, so obviously Malibu and the surrounding area. So this is a good one to follow. And then on Twitter as well, we have a Division 7 specific page. And so during fires or any type of incident, I will share updates directly from the incident command post. So I won't post anything that doesn't come straight from the source. So you'll know that anything on this page is like the latest and greatest information. On the next page, it's another page from the LA County Fire Department website, which was recently redone. And if you haven't been on it, you should go take a look because there's a lot of new information on it. But this page is the contact page, and down at the bottom, it has all of the links to the department-wide social media accounts right there. And the second one that says Twitter incident updates is probably the most important one to follow. It's the PIO, LA COFD PIO page, and they'll provide all updates during fires or other incidents which is where I get a lot of the information for the Division 7 page from. So those are the ones. Oh, and also I was going to mention TCEP, the Topanga Coalition for Emergency Preparedness. They do a really great job of monitoring what's happening, and they also post updates. So they have a Twitter, which I think is worth following as well. But all of those sources that I just mentioned, you'll know that you're getting information that's vetted and that comes straight from the incident command post. So you won't have to worry about it being hearsay or rumors or whatever. So I think that those are the best options for resources during an incident. And as Chief Smith said, I'm the link between the community and the department in our area. So if anyone has any questions or ever needs anything, you can contact me directly, and I can maybe have Sarah put my email address up on the chat function so you guys can get that. That's pretty much all I have. I don't know who wants to go next, but
All right, thank you, Megan. This is Drew Smith. So we'll kick it back to the group, and if there's anything we need to add to, I would love to entertain any questions or give some clarity to anything, or we have anything we'd like to do with that.
I'm wondering if Sarah's having some technical difficulties. This is Susan Duenas, the Public Safety Manager. Sarah, can you send me a text if you're having trouble?
Hi, Susan. Drew Smith. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like we have a comment from Barden. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name, apologize. Saying, thanks, good to learn about Burning Index daily risk assessment. Is there an online daily notification system to provide fire condition updates to mobile phones like the one we see in front of stations?
Ooh, that is good. Well, actually, yes, there is. So I'm trying to think of the best resource that you could have for that. I could say for the daily risk, and we know that we're in a high risk day, what we do is Megan will put out a high risk notification, and I do a little fire behavior summary and stuff, and we push that out, and like TCEP will put it on their website. But the best source to know if you have a high risk day, if you go to the National Weather Service Los Angeles, they highlight it. It's on their main page that you go to. So you can get buried in data that different people will use, but for the general overlook on a high risk day, or if you have elevated fire danger, the National Weather Service, if you put in National Weather Service Los Angeles, on their main screen, if it's a high risk day that warrants extra public notification, it will be on their main page.
Okay. So we have another question from Hans Lutz. It says, what is the likelihood for another fire in the Woolsey Scar? How would an ignition be different this time than in 2018?
Oh, great question. To be significantly different. So you can have a fire that happens within the Woolsey Fire Scar. So within that, we know that we have areas along the 101 corridor, and I'll just use Canaan, that has a significant amount of grass. Las Virgenes Canyon has a lot of grass. Grass burns very fast at a high rate of spread, but the ember cast doesn't travel a mile to 3 miles like old growth vegetation that was there for the Woolsey fire. So yes, you could have a fire that has a fast rate of spread, but when you don't have the ember cast that'll travel 1 to 3 miles. Grass rarely has a residency time over 1,000 feet because it's so light and flashy. It doesn't have the same residency time within the convective column or within the wind field. And so the challenges in a fire in the Woolsey Scar will have more of a tactical advantage because of the less energy that's coming out of the fuel bed. There's a significantly less amount of energy that comes out of the fuel bed. So if you think of just about our helicopters or the fixed wing aircraft, everything with those is dependent upon altitude and airspeed, because the difference in altitude and airspeed equals penetration into those fuels. So if we have so much energy that's coming out of that fuel bed, we have high wind speeds, and we have heavy fuels, the efficiency and effectiveness of those aircraft, whether it's helicopters or whether it's fixed wing aircraft, don't have the same efficiency and penetrate those fuels at high wind speeds and high altitudes as they do if you have lighter fuel beds given the same environmental conditions, because you don't have the same convective column, the heat energy that comes out of it. So your airspeed and altitude that you're losing because of those environmental conditions will have more effectiveness in the lighter fuel beds.
Okay, Sarah.
And on the and if you've noticed though, if you want to go around and look at the areas of, we have had really good reproduction in our natives fuels within the Santa Monica Mountains post Woolsey fire. We've had significant rains, and we do the plant species either seed or they sprout, and they are a fire dependent plant within those within the burn scar of the Woolsey or the Santa Monica Mountains. And so we do have regrowth, and you can get the laurel sumac that'll grow and be very lush and green and get 6 feet tall within a year or 2 years time, but it doesn't have the age class of old decadent dead wood that's in it as you would see when it gets in an age class. And usually the tipping point on that is over about 12 years old when you have a transition from the amount of dead component that's in it compared to the amount of live component.
So
Sarah,
can y'all hear me now?
we can, Sarah.
We can.
No way.
Excellent. I don't know what happened. So I have a two-part question from Scott Dietrich. Supervisor Kuehl canceled the Big Rock controlled burn, but we know that the hill fire was stopped by the previous spring fire, i.e. the perfect example of a fire being stopped by a previous fire. We know that controlled burns won't stop wind-driven fires, but at least they give firefighters a chance to halt progress. Please comment.
Okay, so if you want to do research, and this is what I do on the fire ecology side as well and fire history side, is since we populate wherever you're at in the country, but we'll talk to the Santa Monica Mountains, the fire regime has changed over the course of 100 years. And so when you have a population within the community surrounded by vegetation, that fire suppression has dominated what Mother Nature's fire regime was. Or if you go back to how the Native Americans managed the landscape with prescribed fire, they'd had several folds behind it. One is community protection, believe it or not, and the other one is for grazing, for hunting. So within prescribed burns, you hear there's both sides of the controversy on whether it's good or bad. I'm a believer in it because I believe that in what I do as a prescribed fire manager and a fire behavior analyst, it has a significant value. The wildlands for habitat restoration and community protection, and it does have a significant value to it. So a fire, and I'm going to use the word will change its rate of spread in character in an age class of fuels that haven't seen fire frequency for 25 to 50 years than it will in a age class of fuels of the same species that is 2 to 10 years old. So prescribed burns aren't the answer. It's one component to natural fire regime for the landscape. And so with that being said, there's places that we can and we can't, and we evaluate that. Traditionally, there's only 3 ways to do fuel modification projects. You need land mammals. Well, what do we do with that? We bring out goats, and we bring out, or the land mammals, the goats, eat a lot of the vegetation to reduce the amount of tons per acre. So if you reduce the amount of tons per acre surrounding a community or anywhere, you reduce the energy release that comes out of the fuel bed. So you have different tactical opportunities. The second way is through mechanical modification, which is done with mastication, taking the fuel loading from a vertical arrangement and putting it in a horizontal arrangement and leaving it on the landscape. And then it becomes a understory fuel that has a significantly different rate of spread than if you have live standing fuels. And then the third way is through prescribed fire and doing it safely and efficiently. And we do it under our terms, and we can actually surgically burn the fuel. So we can say, hey, this is what we want to do to meet the prescriptive parameters for the burn, is we want to remove 100% of the dead fuel loading and keep 50% of the live fuel loading. Well, how can we do that? We can do that by how we put fire on the landscape, and we can do it and when we do it during the season, to where we have the live fuel moistures that are very live, they're very green, they're very lush, but the dead component that what's in it is in a different state of vulnerability, that we can consume that and leave a high percentage of the live fuels and not have any mortality in it, and we can remove the dead fuel component that's within it. So all those we have to identify to see if there's a viable option wherever it is. We just don't go out and burn just to burn and make it look like the moon. There's different things we can do to do that. Last time that we did a robust burn in the Santa Monica Mountains was in the early 90s in the Las Virgenes corridor in the state park, when we eradicated the Russian star thistle that was in there. And we had to make it as high heat and energy in there to get rid of it. And actually, those of you who lived in the area might remember that in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, that we did those prescribed burns between Lost Hills and along Las Virgenes Road to Mulholland, is we eradicated that, and we did a project with the state parks and national parks and Los Angeles County Fire Department implementation.
Okay, I have another question from Hans Lutz, and those of you who are typing in questions, don't worry, we will get to everybody. We're just taking them in order received. So Hans kind of has a 2-part question. First of all, a specific question about if you happen to know why the Zuma Ridge fire break hasn't been cleared in decades. And then he's wondering, is it possible for another 4 Canyon fire front to come through towards Malibu again this year, or as big as Woolsey, I guess, this year?
No, not as big as Woolsey, but every year, on average, and I'll talk to Santa Ana winds, on average, we get 8 true Santa Ana wind events a year if you go back for 100 years worth of climatology. And it's dependent upon when the fire starts, and our Santa Ana winds routinely last 3 days. So if you have, and I'll give you, if you go back to the 93 Green Meadow fire in Ventura County, and then if you go to the old Topanga fire, those started on the early stages of a ramping up Santa Ana wind. So you will have a wind-driven fire for 3 days until it hits the Pacific Ocean, and then your fire dynamics change once you break the head fire transition. So can you have a significant fire within the Santa Monica Mountains? Yes, the vulnerabilities really, if we take a big swath, is between the 101 freeway and the 405 freeway, everything through the Palisades, everything from Topanga Canyon through the state park to Las Virgenes Road down to Malibu Canyon to Pepperdine. That's our biggest pieces of vulnerability to support large fire growth on a high-risk day, and those high-risk days are when we have our Santa Ana winds. So, and there's a portion to another part of the question. I forgot. If you can remind me, Susan, what it was.
Oh, they were asking specifically about the, hold on.
Oh, the motor or the fire break.
Yeah.
Right. So within the fire breaks, every year throughout all of our organization, our heavy equipment unit goes out there and maintains our what we call motorways, our traveling mechanism or fire breaks that we can navigate. So a significant amount of the fire breaks that have been in the Santa Monica Mountains, a lot of them have been not revisited because of I could say pushback, or because of the land ownership, whether it be the state parks, whether it be the national parks, or private landowners and stuff. So we have those that we do that we maintain every year. There's a lot that we will not maintain because of land ownership, or maybe some environmental sensitive constraints that we have based upon an environmental review on that. However, a fire break alone is not going to stop a Santa Ana wind-driven fire. And if you go back and you think about our fire frequency in the Santa Monica Mountains, how many large fires do we have on those routine days that is in the months of June, July, and August and September that becomes something like the Woolsey fire, the old Topanga fire, the or any of the fire history we have, the Calabasas fire? And the answer is zero. We rarely get large fires. So in that case, fire breaks work extremely well when you have a fire that is being driven by topography, because there's only two forms of energy that move fire across the landscape. It's either wind energy or slope energy. And when you have those slope energy type of fires, which are called topography dominated fires, that's when we stop the fires at roads, ridge lines, and rivers. But on a wind-driven fire scenario, a fire break is not your saving grace behind. It gives us tactical opportunities based upon when the fire changes in character. When the wind stops, now it comes into play for tactical opportunities for perimeter control. But for it to be the saving component to stopping a significant Santa Ana wind-driven fire, the answer is no. It will not do it because of the spotting and the embercast.
We have another comment from Scott Dietrich. In spring of 2019, we reported years of dead palm fronds and dead trees at the mouth of Las Flores Canyon in the creek bed. It is still there as we enter the fire season 2020. Very frustrating.
Okay, so there's a lot of vegetation, and not to pick on the palm frond family, but we can pick on the eucalyptus family, we can pick on the pine tree family. Any of those properties that are owned by people that have it on their property that they need to maintain and thin and maintain their ornamental based vegetation is highly suggested, is what we require. And even if it's not within the 200 feet of your home on thinning, it is highly desirable that you maintain aerial vegetation, because palm fronds, eucalyptus, any dead wood that's in trees that catches fire, it propagates as you go up in elevation, meaning as fire moves across the landscape, the wind speeds increase in velocity as you go up in elevation. So there are different wind speeds from 4 foot to 12 foot to 20 foot to 50 feet. And so we will do our brush inspections and identify for the homeowner what they need to clear. And the homeowners then need to take the responsibility to clear to what is required by the fire code. If they choose not to, it goes through an entire process. So based upon certain trees that you're possibly referring to, it depends on who owns them and who's responsible to maintain them, and then what impacts they will have based upon their location. So if it's a private property owner, it's their responsibility to maintain their landscape.
We have a two-part question from Deborah Frankel. First question, how confident can we be that there will be enough firefighters available should we have another fire like Woolsey this year, considering how many fires there are burning in so many places these days? Then her follow-up question is, we have suggested having goats to the city of Malibu, and there seems to be some problems with getting them or private land issues. How can we get more goats here?
Okay, so getting the goats will have to be negotiated with whoever the responsible party is for the land. So private landowners graze goats quite a bit. So if it's a City of Malibu question, that'll be something that the City of Malibu, the Los Angeles County Fire Department will have that subject matter expertise to look at, is it a viable option for using those land mammals on the landscape? Because just a lot of times you really have to look at the soil stabilization and what impacts it has on the land. And anytime that we do any modifications, there's different sets of regulations we have to go through, and one of them is the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. If it's on federal land, it's NEPA. So the goats are good. I'm a fan of the goats, or land mammals on the landscape. They do a lot and do a lot of good work for that. And there's another part to that question, I know, Susan.
There was. It's about resource depletion. How confident can we? Yeah.
Okay. So I can say for this bobcat fire that is, we're in unified command with the Angeles National Forest. Your fire department, to combat this thing, has brought all hands on deck. We have had firefighters working for 14 days straight, still meeting the 911 needs out of our stations in the community. So if you go back in recent history, how confident can we be? We can't, because when we have multiple fires going on, like we did on the Woolsey, where we had the Hill Fire, we had the Woolsey Fire, we had fires that were going on up north. And so there's only so many people to draw to. I can say with your Los Angeles County Fire Department, with our neighboring agencies, Ventura County Fire Department, with our neighboring agency, the Los Angeles City Fire Department, when we have high-risk days, we upstaff and put everybody on duty and fill every piece of equipment we can. So it's unrealistic to think that we're going to park a fire engine in everybody's house for the property and structure defense mission, but we're going to bring everything that we have with no firefighters at home on their day off. Everybody with this job, we go on a thing called telephone standby and what we call force hire, that you come to work and you populate some type of firefighting equipment. And so if we're I'll say the only show in town, we will have a lot of people to combat the fire. But you have to remember, under these wind-driven fire scenarios, I've been doing this a long time and practice this. This is when it's Mother Nature's time to win, because Mother Nature is angry, and those environmental conditions are significantly supporting the large fire growth endeavor. And so we have to look at how we're going to combat that, because we have some very, very aggressive fire conditions, environmental conditions that we're challenged with. And it's hard to stop, and you won't stop an advancing fire front like that. You have to look to where you have tactical opportunities to mitigate that fire and take those, because once you start getting a purchase on it to combat it is when the situation gets better, but it's very challenging to do.
Next question comes from Georgia Goldfarb. The body of research from wildlife scientists does not recommend the use of prescribed burns in Chaparral. Rick Halsey, John Kelly, Bryant Baker, Anna Jacobson, and Stephen Davis are against prescribed burns. The normal burn frequency of Chaparral is 30 to over 150 years. Frequent burns result in the type of conversion to invasion grasses, which are fire accelerants. They also destroy native vegetation. Are you aware of their research and recommendations?
Yes, I am. I live in that world as a fire behavior analyst. And so there is a significant amount of truth behind the mortality, if you will, or fuel typing or changing within the landscape. But it's also dependent upon how the fire is put down. So prescribed burns work, because if you look at that, there's a give and a take. You have to have taken, yes, there is a fire frequency and a fire regime that is challenged, and the reason is in the Santa Monica Mountains on fire history, if you go way back, they used to start in the Newhall corridor with lightning in July and August. They would stay in that fuel type for months in the heavy timber strands that are up in elevation, and then Mother Nature would turn on the fan, and then they would blow and go to old burns, and then sometimes burn to the coast. That is significantly true. So there is that, but that was under Mother Nature's fire regime. But we have to look at how, when we have people living in the mountains now that weren't populated there back then, our look on how we're going to do our public safety component has changed. So if you just look at the landscape, yes, you do have the opportunity to get non-native invasive species throughout the landscape. That is absolutely true. But we can also eradicate those with fire. And if you look at some of the places that have had fire frequency based upon Mother Nature and how it comes back compared to how, if we put in a responsible way a fuel modification project through those three different methods, there's a time and place for all of them. But it all comes down to the energy release that's coming out of the fuel bed. And you can only modify that in three different ways that we talked about, because we got to look at how can we do that for the sustainability of being environmentally sensitive to the wildlands and the watershed, but also with the public safety component. I'm very familiar with their research and support a lot of it, but we have to have a solution for the public safety component, because there's a lot of good that comes. You can find just as many challenging articles on the other side of that coin as well. And you're going to be starting to hear that, and we have started to hear that within the last several months because of the wildfires we have and forest management. And don't think about forest management as just trees. It is watershed management as well, and we have to be sensitive to that. Hope that answered your question, but I'm very familiar with the research.
We have a question from Logan Brashear. Can you recommend books or other sources of information on the subjects that you have been discussing?
I will actually. How about Megan and I will work on a few resources that you could read, and we will get that and get it to however we want to bring it up to. We can post it somewhere, whether it's with you, Susan, or as a resource for us on our Division 7 site. So we can come up with that and put those resources up there.
Well, if you get those to me, Chief Smith, this is Sarah. I can also post them on the National Preparedness Month page on the webpage. Oh,
that would be great. So Megan and I will work on that.
Wonderful. We have another comment from Georgia Goldfarb regarding the burn mechanism, yet they do not recommend the destruction of the chaparral by any mechanism, as far as vegetation, I believe.
Right. So, depending on who they are, because we can say, well, we who are a they of the fire department believe in fuels management and being good stewards of the land. And so you could have unhealthy type of watershed as well as healthy watershed, so we find that balance. So whoever they are, there's a lot of theys that don't believe in a lot of things that we like to do. The fire department's approach is not to make this scorn earth that looks like the moon. It is to be environmentally sensitive and have what I call, or what I do is called land management. How do we manage the lands to keep it so we have healthy habitat? How we have a healthy fire regime modification so we do have the beauty that those mountains have. If we didn't have people living in there, then it wouldn't be a factor, and we wouldn't really have, it wouldn't be a topic of discussion besides a mother nature made fire that had this catastrophic outcome. And if it didn't have a public safety component, we always have to remember the public safety component. So there is an exchange for how we want it to look, and we have to be sensitive on how we want to approach it and how we want it to look. But the fire department's view is not to make all the hills black. I do prescribed fire all around the country in different fuel types. And we have some great mosaic effects that does have great restoration for the vegetation and the habitat that is there.
Thank you. We have a comment from a question from Scott Dietrich. A fire starting in Topanga Park at 3 a.m. during a wind event will trap many people. What does LA County Fire plan in that event?
So, well, we plan on first is the public safety component, and that's going to be with your fire and law partnership on giving orders and doing the best we can to protect our people. And we send our firefighters into the most dangerous and hazardous conditions that there is. And there's heroic work that goes on. So what is our response? Our response is to go to the fire, to look at where it's going to impact and protect those the best we can with giving direction and fighting the fire with our firefighters. There it is, and if you come down to timing is everything. There's a significant difference, and that is a great question on if a fire starts at 3 in the afternoon compared to 3 in the morning. And it is that reflex time that we have to get people into a safe place, but the safest place may need to be that they do shelter in place. And it's going to be scary. It's going to be very challenging for all on that. But when we have those high risk days, that vulnerability to public safety is there. And we're going to do everything we can to combat the fire and protect our people. But there's, with Topanga Canyon, just on average 10 to 12,000 people within Topanga Canyon, and it depends on where the fire starts. I can tell you this, we have a higher chance of success of combating the fire if it's in grass and lighter fuels than we do if it's in older fuels. That's for sure. That's why my stance is on land management practice that are efficient and effective.
Are you there, Sarah? Dead air, as they say on radio.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Ha ha! I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, everyone, it is 7:11. We'll take a few more questions, but for those who, actually, Chief Smith, do you have a few more moments, or do you need to continue on your way?
I have my shift was supposed to start at 7, but I am in a good spot because I have my people that I'm replacing. Again, I'm good. We need to take the time to do this. We are good.
Okay. Okay, we have another question from Varden Vashit. Last year, we were getting amber type notifications for the fire that were not close to Malibu, and the same message multiple times. Is there a better way to use geofence to send only the ones that are close to us?
Okay, well, that is not my area of expertise. That is on how those deliverables go out for the alerts and whatever mechanism that is also being managed by OEM with the county. And so how that technology and fencing, that is not my wheelhouse to talk to. I can't answer that on how that technology is delivered or any of that component. I apologize for that, but I can't because I don't have the background in it.
Okay, I think I can speak to that a little bit. This is Suzanne Duenas, Public Safety Manager. Yeah, that has been part of the problems of using that kind of alerting system, which is based on cell phone towers. When you send a message through a WIA, that's a wireless emergency alert, which is like an Amber Alert. It goes to anybody who's within range of a cell tower. And it's been a really double-edged sword. If you recall, in 2017, a lot of cities and counties came under a lot of scrutiny because they failed to use those systems because of that very reason. And so they were blamed, and actually some people lost their jobs over that. So we err, you have to choose which way you're going to err. You're going to overburden people with messages, or are you going to not use a tool that could possibly reach somebody and help them reach safety. That being said, the WIA system, which is a federal emergency management agency system that the city of Malibu has access to as well, they have gotten better with the system to be able to kind of, using the geofences to make it not bleed as much as before, but it's still not a perfect system by any means, I would say. The city's system for just a regular disaster notification using our Everbridge system is a little more direct because we draw a polygon around a specific area, but then it counts on people within that area either having a landline or a cell phone in our system. Whereas with the WIA, it goes to anybody. You don't have to be in the system. It just goes to anybody with a cell phone. So there's no perfect system, bottom line. And when lives are being threatened, people tend to err on the side, at least we are going to err on the side of saving lives, even if we have to possibly overburden some people with messages. So I'm just going to apologize in advance for that.
It is 7:15. If anyone has any more questions, please type them in now. I'll give it a few moments, and if not, I will end the call. Mayor Mikey Pearson says, "Thank you, Chief and everyone," as does Scott Dietrich.
So thank you, Chief Smith. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we appreciate the work and all the work your fellow firefighters are doing on the Bobcat fire. I'm sure it's been difficult. So thank you for taking time out today, though.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you for the support. We're here for you. Please reach out to myself or Megan Courier if you have any questions, you want any further information. We're here to support you and to make clarification on anything, to be involved with the community. for what best practice is. For just remember that the ultimate priority for us is the public safety component. That's what we strive to do every day.
Right.
Well, it seems like there are no more questions. So thank you again, Chief Smith and Megan. I really appreciate it. And I hope you both stay safe and stay healthy.
Okay, thank you everybody who attended. We appreciate the opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank you.
night.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
Bye, everyone. And